Hey guys, so for our question of the day today, we are actually going to be doing a little bit of writing. So I have four sentences up here, and I'm actually going to do two of them with you. And what we're going to do is we're just going to look at these sentences and we're going to correct them. I have left some um, punctuation out and some grammar and things that we need to do here. So I'm going to have you do two, and I'm going to do two. So before we start, I just want to talk about some of our sentences. So since we've been talking about the solar system, our sentences are kind of themed around some space facts. And so I'm going to be talking about those things as I'm reading them. And I had a really special term, science term here that I wanted to make sure I talked about before you started looking at these sentences. And it's actually on question number 2, the lunar surface. The lunar surface is referring to what Neil Armstrong stepped onto. He was the first man to walk on the moon. So when we talk about lunar, I put a question mark up here. Lunar, what is that? Well, luna is the Latin word for moon. So when we say luna or lunar, we're talking about the moon. So when we say surface, that is the top, the spot on the moon where they would have stood or walked. So I want to make sure I describe that first. So the lunar surface is just another way of saying the surface of the moon. So the next time that you are looking up in the sky, maybe you're in the car with your mom and dad or you're outside, you can say, I can see the lunar surface from here. So that's a really scientific word that you can impress people with, or term that you can impress people with. So before I get started on our sentences, I want to do a quick review. So I have 3 different types of punctuation. There's more than this, but this is what we're going to focus on this week. The first one is the period. That is when we end a thought. That does not always mean we're putting a period at the end of a line. It is at the end of what we're going to say. So I'm going to show that to you in just a second. Our middle one is our exclamation mark. That's what we use when we want something to really be accentuated. We're either yelling it or we are excited, so it could be happy or mad, but we want to just say it with expression instead of just saying, just stopping it at a statement like a period. And then our last one for today is a question mark. So when we are asking something or something is being asked, we use a question mark. That lets us know that there is something that we still have to figure out about whatever is being said there. So those are just a review of those things. And so now I'm going to start. You are actually going to be doing this on a Google slide. So if you're on here and you've clicked on this video to watch this, down below are going to be these 2 sentences that you are actually going to try on your own, and you're actually going to just type into the slide and correct the sentences on the slide. So that's the directions for this. You can write down on a piece of paper at home to get it figured out, but then you're going to want to go into the Google slide and fix that on there to be able to show me what your thinking was. So the first thing I'm going to do is read my sentence. So the first one says, Neil Armstrong was the first person to walk on the moon. So he was actually the very first person to ever walk on the moon. We had many people in space before him, but the people that went into space before him actually just orbited or went around in space. They didn't actually get to walk on the moon. He was the first person. Of course, there have been several others since him. So the first thing that I noticed in this sentence is there's a name. Now, we know that at the beginning of sentences, we should always have a capital letter, but this is actually a even more special situation because it's the beginning of a sentence, but it's also someone's name. We always capitalize the first letter of someone's first name and the first letter of their last name. So that's 2 things that I already see that I know I'm going to want to change. And if you're copying these first onto paper, and you don't have to, but if you are, this is just a strategy that I use. I actually just go ahead and make my corrections as I'm going. So that way when I'm ready to recopy, I already know what I'm going to do. So Neil Armstrong was the first person to walk on the moon. Everything looks good, but I don't have any punctuation at the end. Now this is kind of just stating a fact, so I'm going to choose to put a period here. Now, you could put an exclamation point because you could say that kind of in an excited way, but I think mostly this is just telling us a fact. So I added a period to that. So then what I would do, if you're doing it on paper first, is I would just go back and I would recopy the sentence. And again, you're just going to be editing this on a PowerPoint. So you're not necessarily going to be copying unless you just want to. Okay, so now it's corrected. So if you want to do that first on paper, or you can just type and go along in your slides as you're going. So the first time I saw that, I would have clicked here in backspace and put a capital in, and I would have done the same thing there, and then I might have scrolled all the way to the end and put my period there. So whatever works for you. The biggest thing is just remembering that that beginning of a sentence does have a capital letter. The end of our sentence should always have some type of punctuation depending on what's going on in the sentence. And that the names of people and places are always capitalized. So, moving on to number 2, it says he stepped onto the lunar surface, which we just talked about is the surface of the moon, on July 21st, 1969. So this was a while ago. So I already see I don't have a name at the beginning, but I also don't have a capital letter at the beginning of my sentence. So I already know that that's something I'm going to have to do. So I'm going to go ahead and make a note of that. And then I think everything else looks good except for our last punctuation there. And I think this is just another fact. So I'm going to go ahead and put a period there. So I'm not going to recopy this one just because you probably are going to be doing this digitally, but I just wanted to at least show you one example of what you could do if you're doing both. So I'm going to, I have our other 2 sentences. I'm going to read them for you, but these are the 2 that will actually be on the slide for you to fix. So I'm going to go ahead and read them to you, and you can be thinking about them as I'm reading and trying to spot something as I'm reading, and then you will go ahead and correct them on the slide. So number 3 says, many items were left on the lunar surface by the astronauts. And number 4 says, one of the items was a family photo. So those are 2 that I'm going to let you go ahead and try. And I'm going to show you one more time. You need to pause or look back to remember what types we have. And you definitely don't have to use the same ones I was. I want you to really be thinking about, if you were writing this, what type of punctuation would you use, and what other things would you need to fix? So go ahead and give that a try on your slide.